So, as I've said many times, like I am a huge fan of trains, of passenger rail, and I think in North America there are a few gaps in our rail network that really stand out as just absolutely unacceptable. Like gaps that just need to be filled like right now. And I made a top 10 list of what I think are the most important gaps in intercity passenger rail in North America that need to be filled as soon as possible. Now, a few caveats. Okay, when I talk about North America, I am referring to the United States and Canada. I don't mean Mexico or any of those places. My definition of North America is based on the cultural definition of North America. So, those two countries specifically. Uh, Also, there's I'm looking at intercity rail on a broader scale, so I'm not really looking at any routes that are within a metropolitan area or to like maybe like smaller cities that are kind of near a metropolitan area. Like for instance, if you look at southeastern Pennsylvania, there's a lot of different cities that should be better served by passenger rail, but I think they would be better served by like a regional rail system as opposed to like the national rail system, which is Amtrak. Like for instance, we have the GO train here in Southern Ontario. That's kind of the regional rail system in the greater Toronto area and nearby. So like I'm gonna leave those off the list also just because there'd be so many in that one area in particular, like southeastern Pennsylvania, because there's so many like small and mid-sized walkable cities there that I think would be prime candidates for passenger rail connections. But yeah, also that's another thing. When looking at where it's needed, like it's basically kind of a connect the dots between the big cities. And I don't think there's any delusion that anyone has that we can just bring passenger rail everywhere in North America. So like some of these NIMBYs will complain like, oh, you're trying to force feed trains onto people who don't want it. Well, not really, because these are these are routes that would connect big cities. We're not trying to impose it on like every tiny little small town. So anyway, without further ado, here is the top 10. So in order of importance, importance and also how easy it would be to implement it. And the crazy thing is every single one of these routes existed in the 1960s and in some cases more recently. But because of the decline of passenger rail over the last half century or so due to car culture, these routes have all disappeared in the years since. They still exist as freight train routes, but not as passenger rail routes. So, number 10 is between Atlanta and the Charleston slash Savannah area. Currently, there's no rail line there, and I think it would be useful not only for residents but also for tourists because a lot of tourists do go to Savannah and Charleston, and I'd imagine many of them walk around there because if you're staying right in the heart of the city, you don't really need a car. But the thing is, right now there's no link to Atlanta, and Atlanta has a very large airport that a lot of people use. So I think that would be very advantageous, not only for tourists, but also, well, for residents. And if you just look at it on a map, like even for people who don't live right there, it could be a valuable connecting route in the region for travel across a much larger area. Like it's just a really obvious gap to fill in, a really obvious route. Like for people, let's say if they're going from Atlanta to various places in Florida or vice versa, it would just be extremely useful for a lot of different people. So that's number 10. Number 9 is Ohio, basically from Cincinnati to Columbus to Cleveland. It's basically yet again kind of connect the dots. Like there's three large cities in Ohio that basically exist along a straight line and they're not that far from each other. It's kind of a no-brainer that this route should exist. And frankly, I'm pretty shocked that it doesn't. None of these cities are like terribly walkable, but they have enough people that use rail that I'd say there's some demand for it. And furthermore, if this route was built, there'd probably be a lot more people who would start living more, less car centric lives if this existed. It's kind of like build it and they will come. Uh, it's just, to me, seems like a no brainer when you have three cities of that size within the same state that are so close together. And I believe Columbus might actually be the largest metropolitan area in the United States that is not served by passenger rail at all. So, yeah, I mean, taking all these factors into consideration, I'd say this one is a no brainer. Now, number 8 is basically from Vancouver all the way to Winnipeg by way of Calgary and Regina, so in Canada. This one is much longer than the others and would be much more expensive, probably. The tracks do exist. Like, this existed as a passenger train route. It's still used for freight rail, and there's also still tourist trains, the Rocky Mountaineer train that goes through Banff and the Rocky Mountains. But if you look at a map of Via Rail in Canada, it just makes no sense that in order to get from Vancouver to Toronto, you have to go north by way of Edmonton. It makes no sense at all. It is such a massive detour. And furthermore, Calgary is a very important city. It's one of our larger cities in Canada. It's an economically bustling city. It's just really, this doesn't make any sense. Now, I'd imagine a big issue with this route would be there'd probably be some competition between Via Rail and Rocky Mountaineer over the route, because Rocky Mountaineer, they're a tourist train, they make a lot of money. They probably want priority over the corridor, and I think there'd probably be some fighting over that. And it's not exactly easy to build more rail lines there because it's a very narrow corridor, because it's kind of like the Bow River. I believe it would go along the Bow River, which is a route that kind of snakes through the Rocky Mountains. It's where the freeway is also, the Highway 1, the Trans-Canada Highway that goes through there. And it's a pretty narrow valley, and it's also part of Banff National Park. So there's definitely like not much leeway there in terms of where to build, because there's also a very strong like conservationist attitude toward this area, because it's a very important area in terms of natural scenery. So, I mean, I think building another rail line would be a tough sell, like a parallel track or whatever. That might be a tough sell. I don't know. But either way, this is a very important route. And again, like, Calgary is the largest city in Canada that's not connected by passenger rail. I mean, yeah, it has a tourist train, but that's not really useful for anyone but tourists in that region. Like, if you're going from Calgary to the Rocky Mountains or vice versa, it's not really useful for, like, if you want to go from Vancouver to Toronto or Vancouver to Winnipeg or whatever. And what really underscored the absurdity and fragility of our rail network is when the massive fire happened in the town of Jasper last summer. Passenger rail service between British Columbia and the rest of Canada was temporarily cut off because that rail line goes through Jasper. That in and of itself, like, why is there only one rail line connecting Vancouver to the rest of Canada? Like, that right there, just like one passenger rail line. It's like that right there shows the need for this system, this line. Like, and again, it would be useful to people in Saskatchewan and in Regina also, and in Calgary. Again, this one would be a bit more expensive, but I think it's important. It's worth it. Number 7 would be another long distance rail line from New Orleans to Jacksonville. Now, this one actually used to exist until I think quite recently. The trains were very infrequent. It was less than one train per day, I think, but it still existed up until quite recently, and now it's just been discontinued altogether. Now, New Orleans to Jacksonville by itself doesn't sound that important, like how many people are going from New Orleans to Jacksonville specifically. But what makes this route extremely important is that it is the only direct route that connects Florida with basically everywhere to the west, like Texas, California, etc. Like it's basically the backbone of the southernmost part of the United States, like the east-west corridor. Furthermore, it would be important for tourism also, because I'd imagine a lot of people who go to New Orleans also go to the historic cities of Savannah and Charleston and St. Augustine. Like me and my dad, we did a trip to all those cities as part of one trip. We drove though. But and also to other places in Florida. Like it seems like this would be very useful for tourists, but also for residents for long distance trips. It's just a very big gap in the American network that really should exist. Okay, so number 6 is Houston to Dallas. Now, again, you have two very large cities in the same state. They're not that far from each other. It seems like a no-brainer that there should be direct rail access. Now, yes, there is currently passenger rail access between these cities, but you have to go through San Antonio. And it's basically, the three cities are kind of shaped like a triangle with each city on at one point of the triangle. And what you're basically having to do to get between the two biggest cities is to take the indirect route through the other tip of the triangle rather than the straight line. It really doesn't make any sense. And I know Texas is a very car-centric state, but Houston and Dallas, there actually are some areas of the inner city that are getting a bit denser, a bit more walkable, and a bit more transit-oriented over time. Furthermore, it's a state with a very bustling economy, which means there's going to be increasing demand for it. Like there's a lot of economic growth and population growth there. It seems like a hot place for a lot of people to move to, like hot literally and figuratively. Not my kind of weather, that's for sure. But yeah, it seems like the demand for this is only going to increase in the near future. And again, like so, a lot of Texans are like, don't mess with Texas, like this isn't our culture, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, well, I mean, it's kind of like the whole like hard times create strong men, etc. Like booming economies create demand for rail networks. That's just the facts. Like if you guys don't want to have trains, then I don't know, don't have such a booming economy. Be like West Virginia, if you guys really hate passenger rail that much. And I mean, obviously there's a whole issue of like immigration and all the problems with that, but even if you took immigration out of the equation, like Texas, there's a lot of internal migration within the United States also. And a lot of people, Americans moving to Texas from other states. So regardless, like I'm just saying this, economically speaking, this is an important corridor and it would make sense to have direct passenger rail. So number 5 is Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Now this one, they're actually talking about building high-speed rail. Honestly, my feeling toward that is, you gotta walk before you can run. And it's like, maybe you should try building regular speed rail first. And then if there seems to be a demand, then you could upgrade it to high speed rail. That seems to me to make more sense. But regardless, like, yes, there is demand for it because a lot of people from LA go to Vegas to gamble and party and do stuff there, whatever. The tourists go to both cities and business reasons, other reasons too. It seems like a pretty obvious corridor to have passenger rail service. And I mean, obviously Vegas isn't the most walkable city, but at the same time, if you're staying on the strip, you theoretically don't need a car because on or near the strip, because there is the monorail. Actually, me and my dad, we were in Vegas a few years ago and we did use the monorail there. So, I mean, yeah, it does exist. And I think there is demand for this, especially like tourist demand, but also like locals, mostly like people from LA going to Vegas for the weekend or whatever, or like on short trips, sometimes vice versa as well. But yeah, I mean, I think this corridor, there's plenty of demand. And I'd say, again, like you got to walk before you can run. So I think there should be regular speed rail before they even start thinking about actually implementing high speed rail. Personally, I think going straight from no passenger rail to high speed rail is a bit like Icarus flying too close to the sun. I personally think that's ill advised. And I think there's a reason why this whole project is such a boondoggle that hasn't been able to get off the ground. And yeah, you got to walk before you can run. But yeah. So number 4 is Calgary to Edmonton in Alberta. So again, as I mentioned, Calgary has no rail access to passenger rail access to Canada's rail network, but I think even more important than connecting it to the east-west axis, like Vancouver to Winnipeg, is connecting Calgary to Edmonton, because these two cities are very closely tied to each other. They're not that far away. It would be pretty easy to have a passenger rail train going between the two of them. And I think there definitely is demand. Because there's a lot of like condo dwelling people in both those cities nowadays. Honestly, this one's a no-brainer. I am shocked that this doesn't exist. It's really sad and pathetic. I think much like in Texas, like the aforementioned Dallas-Houston example, I think there's just this attitude like, oh, we don't use trains here, but it's like that's not entirely true. There is demand for it. These places are economically booming and it makes sense. Like, I don't know. I think they're so stubborn, but I don't think it's just that. I don't think it's just the rednecks. I think it's also just a lot of inertia, economic mismanagement. There's just so much incompetence and corruption. Like there's so much going on here that is just leading to this. But like this again, it's such a no-brainer. Calgary to Edmonton. Like why? Why are there no passenger trains? This is just ridiculous. Okay, number 3 is Los Angeles to Bakersfield. Now, it's not about so much about Los Angeles to Bakersfield itself. Like that, as I said, would be with when I was mentioning southeastern Pennsylvania. That sort of thing is probably better handled by regional rail, but it's not really about connecting LA to Bakersfield in and of itself. It's about filling in the gap in what is a very important route. Because if you look on a map, like there's trains from Bakersfield going north, but there's this gap between Bakersfield and LA, and it just doesn't make any sense why this gap exists. Like, yes, technically you can take trains from LA to San Francisco along the coastal route, although there's only one a day, which is absolutely ridiculous. But I think like a route this important, like, and there needs to be a connection between LA and the Central Valley cities. Plus, it would be a more direct route between LA, not just LA, but also San Diego, connecting Southern California to not only parts of Northern California, but to states further north also, and to British Columbia. So it's like, it's just an obvious gap to fill in, and it doesn't make any sense. And again, they're talking about building high-speed rail on this corridor, but as I keep saying, as I said for LA to Las Vegas, it makes way more sense, to walk before you can run. Build regular speed rail before building high-speed rail. Also, frankly, for high-speed rail, I think it would make more sense for it to be directly between LA and San Francisco, because those are the main people who'd be using it and benefiting from it. The Central Valley route I would say probably makes more sense for like, I don't know. Maybe maybe they want to put it on the Central Valley route, even though it's less direct to San Francisco, because the topography of the region would make it easier to have high-speed rail there as opposed to the coastal route. That could be the reason. If so, then yeah, I guess it would make sense eventually to have high-speed rail on that route. But first, get regular speed rail first, like that would make so much sense, and have it more than once a day. That's another thing on this list. I'm only talking about routes that don't exist and need to, I could make a whole other video on routes that do exist but don't have enough trains, like per day, or in some cases not even one per day. But that's a whole other list that would require a lot more research. But there's plenty of those too. But right now I'm just talking about ones where there's absolutely no passenger rail. So yeah, there's only 2 left in the list, and I'm gonna put them as kind of one item because they're both exactly the same type of situation. And they'd be the easiest to fix. And these passenger rail links existed up until recently. And thanks to Trump and all the crap he's doing, ruining Canada-US relations, it's going to ruin this too, which is ruin any possibility of salvaging this, which is the passenger rail links between Ontario and Michigan. And there's 2 of them, between Windsor and Detroit and between Sarnia and Port Huron. What makes this so obvious is that the trains exist. Like, there's passenger rail connecting Sarnia to other places in Ontario and connecting Port Huron to other places in Michigan. All you have to do is have the slight little link that goes across the international border. It would require a very short distance of trains going across the border. Similarly, we have trains from Windsor to Toronto and other places in Ontario, just as we have trains from Detroit to other places in Michigan and, throughout the US. It's just a very, very short gap that needs to be bridged. It's literally that, like just bridging the gap between the 2 countries. So now again, I'm not sure exactly how it works because there are passenger trains that go between Canada and the US, but I'm not sure, do you have to switch at the border or something? Or I think there's Amtrak. I know there are Amtrak trains that go to Toronto by way of Niagara Falls. But if you're going long distance, I don't know. I think you would have to switch though, because let's say if you're going from somewhere in the US and you take the Amtrak to Toronto, but you'd have to switch in Toronto to get on whatever other train. So yeah, my point is though, either way, filling these 2 gaps. And again, like, what the fuck is Trump thinking? Like, ruining Canada-US relations? I mean, if he's against globalism, he should be trying to improve our relations because we depend on each other. We're stuck on this continent together, whether we like it or not. And, there's a saying, if you can't be with the one you love, then love the one you're with. And it's like, I think that kind of sums up Canada-US relations and the attitude that we need to take. And passenger rail is a perfect example of that, among so many other things, where it's like we're literally destroying bridges when we should be building them. Well, not technically destroying bridges, but discontinuing passenger rail service on bridges, which might as well be destroying bridges. And again, it's just stupid. But yeah, those are, in my opinion, the most important passenger rail links that are needed in North America that we currently don't have.